This episode of The Walking Dead was a very emotional opener to what seems to be a potentially great season. Within it we have flashbacks of main characters, and have to come to grips with the fact that our favourite character may die in the next 10 to 20 minutes. In my opinion, it was a great season introduction, as it effectively tells us how ruthless and messed up Negan and the Saviours are, and portrays them as a real threat, perhaps even the biggest threat that Rick's group has faced so far. At the beginning of the episode, there is an unnecessary zombie fight scene with Rick. Maybe Greg Nicotero, the director, and Scott M. Gimple, the writer, felt as if they had to live up to the zombie action quota for the show, so they just threw it in willy-nilly. Though I didn't like the scene too much, I did like the fog clouding the background landscape. It gave the setting and tone a Silent Hill vibe, which I like. There was also the callback to last episode of a man being hanged in front of the main group. Rick uses his character reanimated as a zombie for support when Negan is psychotically making Rick retrieve an axe for him. The first half of the episode is incredibly suspenseful, as we don't know who's been killed until around 14 minutes into it. This kept me on my toes and I could physically feel my heart beating, it was that tense. The actual death scenes of Abraham and Glenn elicited some empathetic feelings from me, as we've been following Glenn's journey for 6 years, and now it's come to a brutal end. I didn't know Glenn died in the comics, but I assumed Abraham would be the only death this episode after he died. We're also left with mixed feelings, as his death could have been easily prevented had Daryl not acted out towards Negan. Abraham's death was sad too, as I really hoped that he would survive long enough to have children with Sasha like he wanted, and it's a shame that has been taken from him now. I actually realised later on that he flashed a peace sign at Sasha, something which he had done in previous episodes, and that just served to make his death more gut-wrenching for me. Daryl messed up, and in actuality I'm annoyed at him. Perhaps with this the Walking Dead fandom will stop putting him on a pedestal at this point, because he does make some stupid decisions both in Season 6 and in this episode. Saying this though, I feel as if Daryl either forgot Negan threatening them with more death, or he figured Negan was bluffing, which is probably why he lashed out. Daryl also tends to deal with his emotions through the use of violent action, so I'm not too surprised that this is how he reacted to Abraham's death. Glenn's death scene was good for the most part, but I found it a bit too drawn out. When he's trying to talk to Maggie with his eyeball popped out, I visibly cringed as it looked terrible and campy, and it sort of brought me out of the moment for a while. They could have made his death scene much shorter and still had the same impact. It was hard to tell what Glenn was saying to Maggie, but I guess that was the point, as he had been violently beaten with a barbed wire laced bat. Continuing with the previous thought of maybe Negan's bluffing, at the beginning you would be forgiven for thinking that with the first one's free shtick.
Now I already told you people. First one's free.
When Negan mercilessly beats Glenn to death with Lucille, his bat, it reinforces that Negan is a character who does not mess around, and that he's someone you don't mess with. It is a brutal and unforgiving character introduction which gives us an unforgettable first impression of Negan. Speaking of Negan, Jeffrey Dean Morgan does a good job playing him. He's a villain I love to hate, and you can't really tell his motivations at this point. You can tell how Morgan is having a lot of fun portraying Negan, which is always a good sign when you have over-the-top villainous characters. Negan's morbid jokes really drive the hate for him into you, and it seems as if he's boasting the fact that he just violently beat people to death, and cruelly taunting the other characters who are in grief.
Was the joke that bad?
I'm not sure if I really liked his change from comic to screen though, as he's a lot more pretty boy than his dark, twisted comic book counterpart, but perhaps they're saving that side of him for later into the season. In terms of enemies for Rick's group of survivors, this is the second real human threat our characters have had. Before we had the Governor, but he had a lot less backing behind him than Negan seems to have. The amount of people Negan has at his side truly communicates how screwed Rick and his family are if they try to resist the Saviours again. The scene with Carl almost getting his arm cut off was another intense scene in a sea of non-stop intense scenes. I genuinely didn't know whether or not Rick would end up cutting his arm off. Carl in this scene in particular shows a lot of character growth. He's prepared for his father to do whatever he has to keep the rest of his family safe. This is a vast contrast to the Carl from earlier seasons, hiding behind his mother and being cowardly and childlike, as a child does. It really shows how Carl has grown up in this zombie-ridden world and how it has affected him, though perhaps he has become too affected by it, as he doesn't really seem to demonstrate a lot of emotion for having two of his friends killed in front of him. At the end of the episode we're left in a precarious space. Negan and the Saviours have rode off and we still don't know too much about them, and the bodies of Abraham and Glenn are being transported to be buried. Daryl has been taken by the Saviors, which I'm a bit miffed about, and perhaps this will mean we get some scenes of the Saviour compound from his perspective, which would be quite interesting. I really want to find out more about the Saviours, particularly Negan, as I find them interesting and I'd like to find out their motivations for doing the terrible things they do. Stephen Ogg is a wonderful addition to the cast also. I love his role as Trevor in Grand Theft Auto 5, and I would be more than happy to see more scenes with him as the focal point. That about does it for my thoughts. I could probably go on for longer about this episode and its implications, but I don't want to bore you guys. If you guys have any of your own thoughts on this episode, leave them in the comments below and I'll read all of them. As always, post any suggestions or feedback in the comments too. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.